everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our makeup lesson from last Sunday. That's March 6th. We didn't get to meet then, but we still need to go over the stuff because we are starting a new series on Sunday. This video is made specifically for the ladies of the PG UMC Youth Group. Hi girls. If you are not a member of the youth group or even the church, we're still glad for you to join us. We are actually starting a new series next week, March 13th in youth group, about the Exodus. So we are just trying to get on the same page for that. This is a little bit of introductory. It is not a full lesson. We're just going over some homework to make sure we can start strong next week when we meet together. And you are welcome to join us. I will link the church and service time details in the description box below. And that is about the most YouTuber-y thing I'm going to say this whole time. Promise. Now, we are in the Lenten season right now, and Lent, as you know, is all about looking towards the cross. It's the time period just before Easter and Palm Sunday where we really take the time to focus and orient ourselves on the Lord and what He has done for us in Jesus Christ. I figure this is also a good time for us to look back on what He has done in history, particularly one of the coolest plot points of the Old Testament, and that is Israel's exodus from Egypt, as recorded in the book of Exodus. So we are going to be looking at chapters 1 and 2 as an intro today. Again, we're not deep diving this. We're not, pulling out application points. We're just looking at it so that we can get on the same page and start strong next week. A few weeks ago, we talked about the idea of patterns in the Old Testament, and the biggest pattern is one of redemptive reversals. Now, this pattern of redemptive reversals is first started out in Genesis 3, right after Adam and Eve disobey God and sin enters the world. God promises that this is not the end. He's not going to leave His creation like this. He's going to fix it. It kicks off this pattern of redemptive reversals, which ultimately culminates in the person and works of Jesus Christ. But between Genesis 3 and Matthew 1, where Jesus enters the scene in person, God doesn't sit back and twiddle His thumbs. He's actively involved in acts of redemptive reversals throughout the Old Testament. One, because He loves us and because He loves Israel and wants to bring them to Himself. And two, to give us a picture of what to look for in Jesus. Going through the Old Testament and seeing it through that lens is super fun. And just really amazing. So we are going to do that with one of the biggest plot points of the Old Testament and look for those redemptive reversals in Israel's exodus out of Egypt. I figured that's appropriate leading up to Passover on Good Friday, where we are going to see that fulfilled in Christ. We're going to draw those connections. It's going to be great. Now, the events of Exodus pretty much sets the stage for the rest of the Old Testament, and it's one of the biggest examples we have of God going to radical lengths to redeem people to Himself. And by the way, the Bible is very clear in the New Testament that regardless of your bloodline, if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior and rely on Him for your salvation, you also have the right to become called children of God. So this isn't just about the one time God did this for Israel. This is an example of what God does for anyone who calls out to Him. The book of Exodus is a rich story. It is so full of good things, but our time is limited, so we aren't going to get to dissect everything as deeply as we normally do in youth group. We're not even going to finish the whole book. But there's plenty of meat for us to work with to dive in and take a big picture look about who God is, what He has done for Israel, and what He has done for us through Jesus Christ. And it's some really cool parallels that we're going to make. This intro lesson is not going to be a super deep dive Bible study with applications and, in-depth looks. This is to make sure that next week when we come to meet, we're starting off on the same page. We're going to do kind of a summary of the story to make sure we've got the picture in our heads of what this looks like. I found that when you're reading the Bible, particularly narratives like in the Old Testament, if you can kind of summarize what you've read and what's going on, it kind of gets in your head a little bit better. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to summarize. We're going to walk through some of it. We're going to take out parts, kind of look at it a little bit and put them back where they go. And then we're going to talk about what God is doing and what this whole intro to the book tells us about who God is. And that's going to set up our series for the rest of, until Easter. It's going to be great. It's going to be fun. Now, youth group, last week I asked you guys to read Exodus 1 and 2, chapters 1 and 2. That is the intro to the entire book of Exodus. So if you've done that, great. That's awesome. If you haven't done that, or if you're not in the youth group and just want to join in, pause this video now, go read Exodus chapters 1 and 2, and then jump back on in because we're going for a ride. All right, ready? Let's go. So, Genesis ends with Joseph's family and extended family finding refuge from a terrible famine in Egypt, thanks to God placing Joseph in a position of great power and responsibility, despite a rough and traumatic and just terrible road to get there. What Satan intended for evil, God made good. Redemptive reversals. In Exodus 1 verses 1 through 14, we find out that 400 years later, the Israelites are still there, but this time conditions are much worse. The sons of Jacob quickly grew from being 13 brothers with their families to a lot more. And that's exactly what they were supposed to do. God told his people in Genesis 1:28 and 35:11, be fruitful and multiply. That's what Israel did in Egypt. Now Pharaoh enters the stage. A new Pharaoh arises who has completely forgotten that Jacob literally saved everybody in Egypt's life as well as his own people's. He sees this growing population and he sees it as a threat. Now, at this time in Egyptian history, the Egyptians had been ruled about 150 years after Jacob and his family arrive in Egypt. Egypt was taken over by a foreign power, by the Hyksos. I'm probably butchering that name, but they ruled for a long time. And about 1500 BC, in about 1500 BC, the Egyptians rose up, gathered strength, and kicked out this foreign ruling power. And they're set up, they're ready to set the stage as they're prominent now. They are rising to power, they are peak, and they are the power to be messed with in that area of the world. Now, that Pharaoh looks down and he sees he's got a increasingly growing population of foreign people living right in his own land. He just got to power. He feels threatened. And what's his solution? Enslavement. He's not getting any Nobel Peace Prizes at all. The Bible tells us it gets bad for the Israelites. But Pharaoh's plan backfires. He thinks if he can enslave this people, they're not going to join another army and fight up against him. But despite their enslavement, Israel continues to be fruitful and multiply. And the more they grew in number, the more threatened Pharaoh felt. And the more threatened Pharaoh felt, the worse the treatment of Israel got. The Bible uses words like bitter and ruthless and hard service. Those are strong words to convey a really, really bleak and terrible situation. But Pharaoh doesn't stop there. His next step for this growing amount of people is population control. So in chapter 1, verses 15, he starts doing something that's just horrendous. He gathers the Hebrew midwives and he tells them to kill any male babies that they help birth. Do you want to know what they didn't do? That. The midwives, whose names are listed here, Shiphrah and Puah, they lie and they tell Pharaoh that the Hebrew ladies, man, they're just hardcore. They give birth before we can even get there. Sorry, out of our hands. They lie and they tell Pharaoh that there's nothing that they can do about that. And God rewards them for this. So what's ironic here is that Pharaoh is concerned about the Hebrew men joining a foreign army to overthrow him. He's forgotten about the Hebrew women. Now, the Hebrew women are the ones, in fact, who are the ones that show that they are faithful to the Lord, joining his army. God's the ultimate enemy of Pharaoh in this story. And as a result, it is the women who preserve the life of Moses and countless Hebrew boys, so that God's will, which again is in direct opposition of what Pharaoh is doing, will be accomplished. So shout out to those midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who by directly disobeying a law that was not of God, saved countless lives and set the precedence of women being incredibly crucial to God's plan, which is something that is true for the entire Bible, but Exodus kicks us off strong with these ladies. Quick side note, not going to go on a complete rant. Youth group girls, you know what I'm talking about. But throughout the book of Exodus, we see multiple pharaohs referred to only by their title. Pharaoh, king, right? But not their personal names. We have to look at non-scriptural records to find out these guys' actual personal names, which is most likely Amenhotep II or Ramses II, depending on dating. I think it's Amenhotep, but that's besides the point. However, Shiphrah and Puah are mentioned here by name, even though they only appear in just a few verses. 6 verses of the Bible, they're in there. Pharaoh's in there for most of the book, but we get Shiphrah and Puah's names. And we, even in the story, God says that he honors their faithfulness in the face of opposition, both in their lifetimes, by giving them families and children, which is something they clearly wanted. But he also honors them by including them in his holy and infallible scripture, so that now, thousands of years after the fact, we know who they are. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. Back to the story. Pharaoh no longer trusts the Hebrew midwives to be the ones to do his dirty work. Honestly, it was kind of stupid of him to think that they would do it in the first place, but I don't know. Guess he was too big for his britches. So instead, Pharaoh passes this job along to the Egyptians and instructs them to toss any male Hebrew baby that they find into the Nile River. And unfortunately, the Egyptians are a lot more efficient for his purposes than the Hebrew midwives. So that's the setting we have of when Moses enters the picture. Now, when Moses is born, his mom sees that he is a healthy baby. Now, this is before modern medicine, which has, since the 1950s-ish, skyrocketed infant survival rates. But back then, they didn't have that. A healthy baby was, like, amazing. It was a gift from God. And it's her son. She doesn't want to leave him and, be separated from him. So Moses' mother hides him to keep him safe for 3 months. And then she realizes that she can't keep that up at all. So she hides him in the safest place she can think of, the reeds in the river. Why? Who's going to be looking for a living baby there? Not the Egyptians. So his sister stays near to keep an eye on him, because she can't bear to leave him. She wants to see what happens. She's like, this can't be the end to the story. And it's not. As luck, or I don't know, maybe the all-knowing God would have it, Pharaoh's own daughter, the one who made this decree, his daughter, goes to bathe in the Nile, and she finds Moses. Miriam plucks up her courage, goes out and talks to Pharaoh's daughter, which is huge, and after talking to Miriam, Pharaoh's daughter decides to pay Moses' own mother for the job of raising him. This is crazy. I mean, this is a wonderful example of God's provision. Not only did he provide baby Moses with his life, he provided his mother a source of income in a time that was very trying. He provided Moses a good environment to grow up with his family, to get his roots in, and then he provided Moses with the experience of living in a palace and having a life of privilege and learning how things work a little higher up. And he also provided Moses' mother more time with her son. Like, I'm a mom, all I want to do is hang out with my kids. That time when they're young is precious. So this is an excellent example of God's provision in getting his will done and caring for his people. So, Moses grows up in Pharaoh's house, but he still has a strong connection to the Israelites. Now, he thinks that because of his privileged position as a Hebrew who grew up in the palace, he feels a little bit of responsibility with that. And he kind of thinks it's his job to stand up for his people, right? And that's not true, but he's not ready yet. In chapter 2:11, Moses is out one day and he sees an Egyptian man just beating the living snot out of a Hebrew man. And he's not okay with this. His blood starts to boil. The injustice is under his skin. He looks around and he strikes down the Egyptian. He kills him, buries the body to cover the evidence. He thinks he's done something helpful, but knows that he's going to get in trouble for it. So the next day, he tries to break up a fight between two of his own people, two Hebrew men, and they reject him. They look at him and they go, "Who made you boss? We don't have to listen to you. What are you going to do? Kill us like you killed that Egyptian?" That's when Moses knows he is busted. So not only do his own people reject whatever amount of authority he thought he had, but they rat him out. So being rejected both by his own people and the Egyptians who raised him, Moses flees to the desert and he starts a new life. He finds a job as a shepherd, which is the exact opposite of chilling in Pharaoh's palace. He gets married, he has a son, and life moves on. He feels like his radical days of attempted leadership are over, and he's just kind of settled. We'll get more into that next week when we dive into Moses' calling in Exodus 3 and 4, but that's kind of where he is. He tried to do the right thing. He went about it wrong. He failed miserably, and he flees to the desert. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, God is listening to the cries of his people, and he remembers his promise to Abraham. Now, those last verses in 2:23 and 25 tell us something really important. They work in tandem with the opening of this entire book, chapter 1, verses 1 through 7, to remind us that Israel, the offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're not defined by their slavery, but by their covenant relationship with the Lord. The same is true of us, by the way. We aren't defined by our position in life, whether we be slaves or freed or stuck working at a burger restaurant or CEO of Amazon. Those things don't define us. We are not defined by what we do, what we can accomplish, our body's capabilities or limits. We are not defined by what other people tell us about ourselves, about what other people in society say we are. We are not defined by a mirror or ideas. We are defined by God, whose fingerprints are all over us. We're defined by his love for us and our standing as his children. Take whatever applications of that you need, because it's a big one. Now, every week in youth group, when we read a passage and we're trying to understand what it means, we fall back on three big questions. Number one, what does this passage tell us about God? Number two, what does this passage tell us about people? And number three, if those things are true, what changes in my life? Now, we're not going to go through all three of those questions because, again, we're just setting the stage for some real deep diving and work in the next few weeks. But we are going to answer the first. Now, there's a lot of stuff we could get out of who God is in this passage and what he does. But there's one main overarching thing I want us to get from this and kind of summarize for the next few weeks as we prepare to go into that. That big thing that these two chapters teach us about God is that the Lord is faithful. He remembers his promises and he is faithful to fulfill them. In the next few weeks, we're going to dive in and see how God shows his faithfulness in the Exodus account. But remember, God's faithfulness is not a characteristic that he uses in just specific instances when he feels like it. God is faithful all the time. He is still faithful to his promises to us, and he still hears us now, thousands of years after the Exodus account. God's character doesn't change, and we can rest in that. What a relief, right? So we're going to leave that here for now. This Sunday, 5:30, we're going to dive into Exodus 3 and 4. It's going to be really fun and really interesting, and all of this is going to lead up to the Passover. And I am so excited to teach you guys. It's going to be great. Thanks for joining us and for taking this time out of your day, out of your week to listen and tune in. I will see you ladies on Sunday.